Okay, we will make a start as it is past. So I think we might have to get someone to close the doors. It's still quite noisy out there. So welcome everybody. My name's Chris Sargent. I'm a GP at Arch in Brighton, which is GP surgery for people who are homeless. And I'm also part of the Pathway service, which is exploring the social franchising with Paul. So that will be the second part of what we're talking about. The first part we're doing is talking about integrated healthcare for people experiencing homelessness. What happens in Brighton shouldn't stay in Brighton. And we did decide on that title before the coronavirus outbreak started in Brighton and went to everywhere else. So some things perhaps should stay in Brighton and some things shouldn't stay in Brighton. So we've got a panel of people who are going to chip into our presentation today, and we'll take questions at the end. So there's me. Then there's Hannah Bishop, who is the advanced nurse practitioner from Arch. There's Katie Carter, who is also from Arch and the Pathway team at the hospital. There's not Katerina. Unfortunately, Katerina couldn't join us, but Greg Locke is here, who's the in-reach nurse and also does outreach to the community in Brighton. And Simon Gale is the CEO of Just Life, who are the community support service for people who are living in emergency or temporary accommodation in Brighton, whom we work very closely with. And then myself, Greg and Katie form the Pathway team at the hospital as well, so we work very closely together. So what we do integrated working. So we've tried to design a system and change the services that we have in place so that we never lose sight of the person who we're trying to look after. So if the person who is homeless turns up in the hospital or turns up in the GP surgery or turns up in emergency accommodation, we're trying to fit those people into a system that can hold them, and the integrated care helps to give them the best outcomes. So we work across primary, secondary and community services. We support people while they're in the hospital, as all the Pathway teams do, but then when they come out of the hospital too, and we try and have a seamless transition for people moving into the support services in the community. We do outreach into day centres. We do joint visits to emergency, temporary and supported accommodation, and we go and see people who are out on the street as well. So Hannah is going to take us through our service map.
Okay, so this is a version of a service map that we've tried to create. In preparation for coming here, we kind of redrew this. It has been through various versions as services have grown and developed, as funding has come and funding has left, as different teams have evolved and grown. So this is where we're up to at the moment, and it looks here to be quite linear, that people come in at one end and come out the other end. In reality, it looks a lot more like this, which is just a whole load of backwards and forwards, round and about. People don't necessarily come in at the beginning, they can join anywhere and go in any direction, and that's a bit more what the real life kind of situation is for working with the people we're working with in Brighton. But for the purposes of today, we'll start at the beginning and kind of work through in a more linear way to try and explain to you how things have all worked together and how that influences our patient care and what happens on a day-to-day basis. So starting at the top with hospital admission to BSUH, which is our main acute hospital in Brighton. We start with these guys. So Greg and Katie get involved. The project first started there in about 2012 as a pilot. So the first one, I think, outside of London, using the Pathway model, and was a research project to look at, does this model work outside of London hospitals as well as inside of London hospitals, and we found it did. And so we continued that work, initially just in the taking referrals from the wards, but as time's gone on, you guys now take referrals from A&E as well, don't you? Would you mind telling us a bit about what you guys do?
Yeah, sure. So our referrals come from anywhere really. So sometimes it's a community member that will let us know, so a hostel, Just Life workers, or it will be from the wards themselves, or it might just be from us spotting someone we recognise or looking at the patient documents through A&E. We'll assess them whether it's together or on our own, depending on like staffing and stuff, and then we'll make a plan really from the moment they're kind of come into hospital, and that plan will be what's happening as soon as they leave really, and that's quite an important part I think of what we do and what the support is going to need to be then. And their journey, as Hannah says, changes whilst they're in hospital quite frequently. So.
And it's also liaising with the wards in the hospital, building relationships with different departments. We run some training programs now with some of the new nurses in A&E. We've got a link nurse in A&E as well that we're regularly in contact with, also on the medical wards as well. They've involved us in their newly qualified and new trained staff teaching program, and also we have done some registrar and doctors training within the A&E department.
So our sort of typical working day would be to go around the emergency wards, so the A&E and then the overnight ward, first thing in the morning to see who's coming overnight and make plans for those people, contact the community services who might be involved with them already, which might be the St Mungo's outreach service, might be the substance misuse services, might be the mental health services. So try and get people together working around that person if they're not going to be in hospital for very long. If it looks like they're going to be admitted to hospital, then we do our initial assessment on them while they're in the emergency department and then follow them through the hospital, making some sort of contact with the housing services very early on, so probably on that first day, sending a duty to refer to alert the housing services that person's in, so that then that can be followed through and being processed while they're in their sort of hospital journey. Then after we've done that, it would be going to see people up on the usual wards, and obviously people who are homeless can be in any part of the hospital, and they often change departments as well. So I think one of the things that having an in-hospital team specifically devoted to people who are homeless is that all that work continues. It doesn't stop because you change from one ward to another and a person who's done a lot of work with you on that ward isn't responsible for you anymore, and then somebody has to start all over again, or it all gets forgotten about. So the idea is that we follow that person through that journey in the hospital until the point at which they're ready to be discharged.
Okay, so then we get to a point where patients are back out into the community, and then a whole load of other systems sort of kick into place. So I work as an advanced nurse practitioner at Arch Healthcare. So we're a specialist GP practice in Brighton. We've been there since 1998 in various different formats and run by various different providers. Currently we're run by Arch, of which Chris and I are directors, and we were part of the team that managed to make sure that the service continued when the previous providers pulled out. And so we provide general practice to the homeless population in Brighton. So that's, as we've already mentioned a little bit in the discussions earlier, that's working now within the PCN, which is challenging for us. We're finding that a little bit tricky, but it's also about us linking in with all the other services that provide services for homeless people in Brighton. So that is substance misuse, that's rough sleepers services, that's adult social care, that's all of the housing departments at the council. It's all of those things. So it's quite a broad role that general practice is fulfilling in our town, and we have all the usual services that general practice would have within it. So on the day, GP appointments, nurse appointments, all of your usual QOF and locally enhanced services and all of those things. So we're trying to juggle all of that with the population of homeless people in Brighton that we look after. So we found a few years ago that we were really struggling to join up all of the gaps in all of that, and we had lots of patients that we weren't getting to and that weren't able to engage with us as healthcare, weren't coming to appointments, that that we were seeing big gaps between them being seen at an A&E department perhaps, needing some follow-up but never coming to general practice for the follow-up, and falling through gaps. So we started another pilot project looking at, could there be like a pathway plus? Could we have some engagement workers in the community that we refer into, that the hospital refers into, that pick up some of these patients and help us to engage with them and help them engage with us? And that work is run by Just Life. So we started off with 2 workers originally, and we now have 5 full-time health engagement workers in that team. And Simon heads up that service. Do you want to tell us a bit about what you do?
Yeah, of course. So, as Hannah said, we've got 5 health engagement workers based in our team. They'll work with about 75 to 80 clients in total any one time. That could be for just a few days, or it could be for a couple of years, depending on the need. We'll get referrals directly from the pathway team at the hospital, or from Arch or other GP services, other homelessness services, anyone really. And we will do anything we can to try and engage them in their healthcare, all those bits that are up on the screen, taking them to appointments, really sort of knocking on the door in the morning, say you've got an appointment, let's go, we'll get a taxi, here's a bus pass. But we try and be as holistic as possible as well, and trying to help them engage in their housing, substance misuse, their mental health, any issue really. Their benefits is a big one. Yeah, that's probably a bit of a very brief overview of what we do.
That's great, thank
I
you.
think also one of the important bits where things have joined together is that when the person comes to the point of being discharged from hospital, then Katie will collect them from the ward, take them. I should let you say what you do.
No, that's okay. Generally speaking, if we're all in, then I'll do the housing options form with them. I'll take them, and then on discharge, like Chris says, I will take them to the council, and then they're placed, which they normally are. I will take them directly to their accommodation. I will get a moving impact from Just Life if they've got them, and I will get them settled in, get them bedding, and then make sure that they know when their appointments are, normally the following few days. So we just make sure that that's done completely, because often we were finding that we put them in a taxi. If they even got in the taxi, they'd often not get to the council. Once they get to the council, they need that advocacy, but then once they're done at the council, you've got to go to an office, get a key, and then go. And it's just a little bit of a nightmare and very overwhelming when you've come out of hospital. So that's a really important part of what we do. And that does take the whole day, but it's well worth it.
That's great. And those health engagement workers are massively supported by the integrated primary care team, which it was set up, I'm not quite sure, you probably know when it was set up, Greg.
Yeah, 2013.
2013. And again, that was a bit of an experiment by the trust that run all of the integrated primary care teams across Brighton, Sussex Community Foundation Trust. So they run all the district nursing teams and the physiotherapy teams, and they were willing to try having a team that worked specifically with people in hostels, and then that expanded to emergency accommodation, temporary accommodation as well, recognising that they have a specific group, specific needs and that aren't be able to be met by the more mainstream teams. They are an extremely busy team, and they probably need more people in it to meet the need, but they are our kind of out there people that are out there doing stuff with people every day in really complex situations, and really seeing things firsthand of what this emergency accommodation is like and who's living next door and how that's impacting on the health of the person in this room and this person's palliative. And that's how, so we'll go into a little bit more in our case studies later about how it all unpacks. But Greg, could you tell us a bit more about that team?
Yeah, sure. So we're quite a unique service because we cover healthcare in the community and in the hospital. We're made up of specialist nurses that worked, 3 of us worked together in a team before it was set up, working primarily with the central GP surgeries in Brighton. And we also have occupational therapists and physiotherapy within the teams, and we as it says on the board, we're working in temporary and emergency accommodation, outreaching. We outreach in day centres and also in hostel accommodation. We provide clinics in each of those environments, obviously mainly the hostels and day centres, where we can be open for people to engage with us and try and address health needs before the need to come into hospital, and obviously avoid inappropriate admissions to hospital, but generally to improve the healthcare of our homeless population.
Great, and so linked to that as well as, so there's outreach that all of our teams do in various ways. So myself and another nurse colleague do some outreach into day centres and some specific pieces of work in different hostels around Brighton, around meeting people where they're at. So that's picking up new patients to Brighton, getting them registered, getting them into the services, talking to them about what they can engage with and how we can help, making sure they're plugged in with rough sleeping teams and all those sort of things. So we're out and about doing those sort of things. And then we also have a way of seeing patients in their accommodation or in their hostels in a home visit type way. We've really struggled with how do we do home visits safely, how do we do it at the right time, and all of those things. And what we've come up with is that the nurses that are out and about every day in and out of all these accommodations come to us with patients that they're struggling with, and then we plan a visit to those patients at a set time. Sometimes they're not there, but more often than not, we will try and catch them eventually. And Chris does that. It's kind of like a kind of a ward round.
Yeah,
at the
we
community.
do a joint visit with. So I do a joint visit with Katrina, who's Greg's boss, or leader of Greg's team. So we will take a day once every 2 weeks. She will make a list of people that they're struggling with, who haven't been able to get to the surgery, that they think may be deteriorating, and then we'll go together and do a joint assessment and a joint visit and make a joint plan about how that person's care should be organised. So that's really, really useful, I think, for us to have that team identifying those people who are deteriorating, but also for them to have the additional clinical input. They say it's very different from what they normally have if they have a patient who's registered a regular GP surgery, to try and coordinate a time when that GP can come out with them to see this person on a particular time is very, very difficult to organise. So I think that's really sort of high quality joint working that we do on a regular basis.
Yeah, and that's something we can plan for. And what is down the side of the diagram there is, it says MARM, which stands for Multi-Agency Homeless Health Meeting. And that's a meeting that we have every 2 weeks. It's happening this afternoon. Our colleagues are running that for us today while we're here. And that is a meeting that everybody is invited to. So people who work in hostels, our staff, the people who work in Arch, the SCFT team, the hospital team, the health engagement workers, housing, rough sleepers teams, police if it's relevant and helpful, whoever is involved in these patients. And patients are kind of nominated to be discussed at that meeting, so we know ahead of time who is going to be discussed. It's usually 2 to 4 people per meeting, and it's an opportunity to get everybody around the table to try and discuss how do we move this forward, what are the problems that we're facing. Sometimes it's just as simple as saying you're doing a great job and you're holding it all together really well and you're doing everything that you can. Sometimes we come up with new ideas of things that we could try, or we could get other people involved that might help move things along for patients. And that kind of runs through all of this, and so people might come up at that meeting where they're saying, I'm really struggling to get this person into the surgery, they've got this problem, that problem, and I've booked them 15 appointments, they've DNA'd them all, what can I do now? And it might be that, we'll say, okay, let's get Chris and Katrina to come out and meet you and meet them, and then we'll take it from there. and then it might take a few visits to then they do come into the surgery, or we might progress things. So the multi-agency meeting is something that we really think works well for this patient group, and it really helps support staff, and it helps move things on for patients as well. So I think we're going to do a couple of unpacking some patients that we have looked after in the last couple of years, maybe, and Greg and Katie are going to help us do that.
Yeah, sure. So the first case study that we're going to talk about is a gentleman, 58 years of age. He was homeless prior to admission, and he was sleeping in a car. Now, we had seen him a year previously when he came to Brighton. We tried linking him into the local services and housing because he'd come in with respiratory condition. Although he was deemed as a priority health need, the council at the time did not see that he had a local connection, so that they didn't accommodate him, and he went back to sleeping in his car. And he then came back into hospital, and obviously we recognised him, re-engaged with him. It transpired that he did have a sister living in the local area, so we were able to kind of use that within the duty to refer, because the time that he did come in, we had the Homeless Reduction Act out, so we could build upon that, and we had a better relationship with the council at the time. So looking at his health, he was admitted with weight loss and poor general health, and the doctors on the ward had queried whether he had TB, so he was kept in hospital for 2 weeks for treatment while they were trying to ascertain whether he did have TB or not. He had a history of cannabis and alcohol use, and a history of self-neglect, poor appetite and self-care, so we were concerned whether these were cognitive issues. We were exploring whether his cannabis use was contributing to his cognition. He had little motivation, and trying to get him to understand what was happening with his health while he was on the ward proved quite difficult. He was leaving the ward regularly to sort of hang out with his friends. I think the local Rough Sleepers team had found him in a caravan with some of his friends. So that obviously threw up concerns from community groups as to whether, you know, the TB that he had would be spread amongst the community. So there was a lot of education that was needed for services. With housing as well, they were a bit unsure as to where they could place somebody that had TB, if he had TB. So there was a lot of these things going on, and we involved the TB nurse specialist in the hospital to educate some of the services. And once he'd completed his 2 weeks of initial treatment, he was then discharged to continue treatment in the community. Now, he was placed in emergency accommodation, and he was initially coming to hospital for observed treatment. But he was often forgetting. He had been referred to Just Life at this time, so we were working with his health engagement worker to see how we could kind of initiate support in getting him to the hospital. And where he was placed was only 5 minutes walk from the hospital as well. So to us, that might mean, well, it's not that difficult, but this, you know, the gentleman was having some of those difficulties with his cognition, his motivation, so that kind of opened up other areas around his mental health. So we referred him to our responsive services to see whether they could support with that treatment in the community. As query whether he needed a package of care as well, which we had explored in the hospital, but we had some difficulties with the adult social care team identifying that he didn't need any care input whilst he was in hospital or when he was discharged. So with that, we were also going out to visit him ourselves. So within my capacity as an in-reach nurse, I work with my team in the community on a Tuesday. So I was able, because I knew the patient as well, to go out and see how we could support him. But in the background also, we were kind of trying to piece together, some other information that might help us. Now, with getting responsive services involved, we got a care package in place so that we could get carers to come in and prompt him with his blister-packed medication. Health engagement worker was able to make sure he got to the shop, got some food, was able to eat, and he was still not really that motivated to take care of himself from a personal care point of view. So I think Chris, you and Katrina had also gone out to see him because there was a few concerns around kind of his capacity as well, because we'd ascertained that he had a previous head injury in the past. So with that brain injury, was that the cause of some of the things that were going on for him? And sort of further to that, I think you guys had assessed and looked at his kind of appropriateness to live in the community independently and look after himself. And he was then accepted for an environment that worked with people with acquired brain injuries into a care home, which, it was something that eventually he wanted. So I think that was a good.
It's always a bit of a danger if somebody looks like they haven't got any care needs because they're sitting in a hospital bed and we're always told, well, they're going down in the lift for a cigarette out to the front door, so they can't have any care needs. And then that person goes back to a small room in some emergency accommodation. And I think we went round the week after he'd been discharged from hospital and he still had his hospital pyjama bottoms.
A few weeks actually it was, yeah.
Trousers. So he really wasn't doing anything for himself. He was probably just about managing to pour some cereal into a bowl and eat that, but that was about the limit. So he obviously did have quite marked care needs, but I think those can be covered up in the environment of a hospital where everything's being done for you anyway.
So, hello everyone. I was quite mindful of that. Sometimes with our caseloads, we actually have 50% of our caseload people that have never been homeless before, and it's a really good opportunity to stop that cycle. So I wanted to use an example of someone that came into hospital housed and previously lived what you would perhaps consider a normal life, and then on discharge it was going to look very different, and I just thought it'd be quite a good one to talk about. So it was a gentleman, 43-year-old man, ex-forces, dual nationality, both US and UK national, came to hospital with alcohol-related issues that had just kind of completely got on top of him. He was living in a family accommodation and was told by the family that he would not be able to return on discharge. Environmental health were involved due to severe self-neglect and the alcohol use. As soon as he entered the hospital, our team assessed him and a duty to refer was sent off to housing. Because he wasn't able to return and he was priority need, it was kind of simple in that respect, but it was still quite difficult for a patient to understand that he wasn't able to go home and that the family in question weren't going to talk to him about it either. So it was kind of our job to tell him that, which is a really hard discussion to have. So when he was medically ready, I took him to the council. There were lots of things going on for him though, so he was diagnosed with Korsakoff while he was in, so neurologically there was lots of things going on for him. And he really struggles when he does drink, mobility goes, he's not able to cope at all. Even when he's detoxed, it takes a long time after that for things to go back to normal for him. So he was housed. Straight away a referral was sent to Just Life. We've got an amazing health engagement worker, but it took us quite some time to engage him. He was still drinking on discharge and he came in multiple times, I think 4 admissions in the end. She worked, she persevered, and it was quite obvious that he was lacking in a package of care. This was discussed in the hospital, we've already touched on it, but as the detox ended and he was doing much better, it was seen that he didn't need that package of care, but as soon as he kind of left hospital, it's evident that he was still severely self-neglecting. So Ella, the Just Life worker, is fantastic, got the package of care sorted for him. within the community actually, which is such a shame. We wish it kind of happened in hospital sometimes, but sometimes they have to go into the state they're normally in for adult social care to sometimes realise that they're not coping at all. Two additional safeguarding was also raised subsequently because there was some exploitation going on in the emergency accommodation he was in. We also, he wasn't engaging with a GP before admissions to hospitals, so we ensured that he was registered with Arch, which happened to be round the corner from his emergency accommodation, which is really good, but it's also one of the toughest emergency accommodations to be in. So the good thing about this particular patient is when he's detox, which happened every time he came into hospital because of other issues that were being addressed at the time, he does really well. He attended groups, he really wanted to stay off drinking, and that was really what made this kind of a better case than some that we are all used to. So because of that, on his I think it was his third or fourth admission, apologies, I can't quite remember, but he was detoxed. He was not actually in for any other acute medical issue, but we managed to agree for him to be fully detoxed on the basis that Ella miraculously managed to get him placed into rehab directly from hospital, which is something that I think we all can agree would be marvellous. It doesn't happen very often, but it did happen for him, which is just fantastic. He had a lot of nurse input as well when he was in the community due to the kind of, this was over months, by the way. It sounds like it was just like really quick. It wasn't, of course. But when he went into rehab, he just did fantastically well. And since that, he's left rehab. He's been off of alcohol this whole time. He sends updates occasionally to his health engagement work and pictures of him fishing, and he's just doing so well. And if it wasn't for all of us being involved in that, it just wouldn't have happened for him. So, and as a result, he's not in homelessness anymore. And I think that's a really fantastic case to talk about. So, it's me.
Great. So we'll move swiftly on because we're nearly out of time for this bit. So I think we've given some good illustrations there of how the system should work and then how the system actually works in reality. So a lot of that is by kind of pushing the boundaries of what the teams would normally do and finding some common ground to work with other teams. That's it. That's all we want to say on this bit. Any quick questions, because we'll leave on soon.
Is Arch an actual building or an organisation?
Arch is an organisation, so it's a community interest company is the organisation that runs the GP service for people who are homeless.
And the GP service is run from which surgery?
Well, we have our own surgery, so the surgery is called Arch as well. So the organisation is called Arch Healthcare, and then the surgery is called Arch. Lady at the back.
Can I ask if you have homeless families that can access this service as well? Because we work with a lot of the hidden homeless families in Surrey, and there are a lot of similar problems, especially around substance misuse, those sorts of things, but also things like fast tracking, maternity connections, that sort of thing. Do you have any involvement with those groups?
Yeah. So we do have a small number of families that we work with. We have access and fast tracking to. So Brighton has a one-stop maternity service that works with women who have mental health, homeless, substance misuse problems, and so we refer directly any of our pregnant women into that service. They're really proactive, and they do lots of outreach and stuff with the women that are referred to them. So it's small numbers. We also look after families who are travelling families, and so we have a small number of families, children related to those families as well. But it is small numbers. I think probably we've got about 20 under 16s registered with us. On the whole, the emergency accommodation that is used in Brighton for families is not so centrally located, and so the families that are in that accommodation tend to be with other GPs in the city, but we do have some.
Somebody at the front.
Very quickly,
Yeah, go on.
From the first case scenario, how long did it take? Sorry, oh, thank you. Sorry. Hiya. Just out of curiosity, the first case scenario, how long did it take from the moment you guys started to work with that client to the point where you got him into a care home?
So he was in hospital for approximately 3 weeks, and then when discharged, it was probably another 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks of outreaching and getting services in place.
Okay, and that went through a process of going through a panel for...
Chris, do you know that?
I think
He went to
do you have continuing healthcare funding.
Yeah.
So he was fast-tracked through continuing healthcare funding, that funding was being placed, and then I think he was able to. It's quite unusual for it to be that quick.
That's the reason for my question.
And more often than not, we're banging our heads against the desk trying to work out how the heck we can manage this patient while a placement is being found. That's the place we're in more than 3 weeks and you're in, you know.
Yeah, it's the reason for my question. I mean, I manage
absolutely.
temporary accommodation services, supported accommodation services, hostels, and often, you know, we're starting to see an aging population within our client group with serious health, but also cognitive issues, and actually still being kept in hostels because they kind of fit in around the 58 age or, you know, the 50s, and, you know, there's not extra care, it's not care. Care homes also don't work with people with substance misuse issues who tend to not want to work with the particular cohort of people. So yeah, I'm just interested in how you managed to do that.
I think we better move on. If anybody's got any questions to ask us afterwards, do find us in the break or come and grab us at the end of the next section. So thank you very much. Thanks to Greg, Katie, Simon and Hannah. Thank you.
No?